Sewer, London, the 20th of May 1852. By the time the footman drew back the crimson curtains at Stedham House, Lady Tabitha Thurlow had already learned that a woman could disappear while standing in full view of 200 candles. The new family portrait dominated the long wall of the ballroom, its gilt frame broad enough to suggest permanence, lineage, and the confidence of people who expected to be remembered. Alfred Thurlow, Earl of Stedham, stood at the center of the painted group. Beside him sat his wife, Nerissa, composed in pearl grey silk, one hand resting elegantly on the arm of a carved chair. Other members of the family occupied their appointed places beneath a painted column and a sweep of summer sky. Tabitha was nowhere on the canvas. She stood directly beneath it. For several seconds, no one said anything. Then the room resumed breathing. Fans stirred. A gentleman coughed. Someone near the musicians whispered, and a second whisper answered. Tabitha kept her face still. She had sat for the portrait twice, once in March, when the artist had complained that the afternoon light faded too quickly, again in April, when Nerissa had insisted that the arrangement needed balancing. Tabitha remembered the green velvet stool beneath her left hand. She remembered Alfred being impatient because he had promised to meet a man at White's. She remembered the smell of linseed oil. She remembered being there. Perhaps Mr. Bellamy decided the composition was crowded. Nerissa said lightly, as though explaining why a vase had been moved. "You know how artists are." Tabitha turned her eyes from the painting to her sister-in-law. Nerissa was smiling. Not cruelly. That would have been easier. She wore the serene expression of a woman certain that nothing important had occurred. "Then Mr. Bellamy should be commended for his economy," Tabitha said. "He has removed an entire daughter of the house without disturbing the drapery." A few people laughed because they were uncertain whether she had made a joke. Tabitha had long ago discovered that quiet wit confused those who preferred pity. Sir Aubrey Crewe was not confused. He stood near the marble chimney-piece, with one hand tucked into his coat, watching her with the indulgence he usually reserved for servants who had misunderstood instructions. He was Nerissa's brother, a baronet of respectable family and diminishing patience, though no one mentioned the second quality in public. "My dear Lady Tabitha," he said, "you mustn't take it personally. Perhaps even the painter couldn't remember you long enough to put you in oils." This time the laughter was clearer, not loud. London did not require loudness to be cruel. A lady in lilac lowered her eyes to her fan. A young man beside her smiled into his glass. Tabitha felt the old instinct rise in her body, practiced by years of being the useful woman at the edge of other people's occasions. Step back. Make it easy for everyone. Save them the embarrassment of having injured you. Her fingers moved toward the reticule at her wrist. Inside it lay a small brown morocco case, no larger than her palm. She touched the hard edge through the fabric. Her mother's rosemary rested inside between two thin slips of glass, faded now to a dusty green-brown. For remembrance, her mother had once said, "Not because the world is faithful, but because we must be." Tabitha lifted her chin. She did not look at Aubrey. Instead, she turned to Alfred. Was Mr. Bellamy invited this evening? Alfred blinked, as though relieved by the practical question. "I believe so." "Then I should like his absence noted. If he was expected, perhaps there is some reason he could not attend." Nerissa gave a tiny laugh. "Surely we needn't conduct an inquiry over a portrait." "No," Tabitha said. "We needn't conduct anything at all. I only asked whether the man who painted it was expected to stand beneath it." That silenced Nerissa for half a breath. It was enough. Tabitha turned away before anyone could offer sympathy. She crossed toward an elderly countess whose chair had been placed too near the musicians and quietly asked a footman to move it. The countess thanked her. The orchestra adjusted their pages. Conversation gathered again around the omission as water gathers around a stone. Tabitha could feel glances touching her shoulders, her gown. The dark hair, threaded with the first silver, she no longer bothered to disguise. 35 was not ancient, whatever London liked to imply, but it was old enough for society to believe a woman should have accepted her assigned shape. Spinster aunt, useful sister, safe companion, someone to remember other people's appointments. Someone nobody needed to remember in return, His Grace, the Duke of Westmarsh. The announcement carried from the doorway with the ease of a title that required no repetition. Heads turned. Tabitha did not. She was helping the Countess settle a shawl over one shoulder when the room altered around her. It was not merely the silence that accompanied rank. It was a tension-changing direction. Montague Staunton, Duke of Westmarsh, entered in black evening coat and white cravat, tall enough that the men nearest him seemed to straighten by instinct. Tabitha had seen him before, as most of London had. He possessed the reputation of a man who rarely explained himself and was therefore explained constantly by everyone else. Cold, some said. Arrogant, others said. Dangerous only to fools, according to one duchess who had known him since childhood. Tabitha had never spoken to him. She resumed adjusting the Countess's shawl. Aubrey's voice drifted behind her. We were only saying, Your Grace, that even a portraitist may be forgiven for forgetting what society has long overlooked. There was a pause. Tabitha's hand stilled on the fringe of the shawl. Were you? The Duke asked. His voice was not loud. Aubrey laughed, encouraged by the absence of obvious anger. Lady Tabitha has been omitted from the new family likeness. A little artistic judgment, perhaps. Tabitha finally turned. Montague was not looking at Aubrey. He was looking at the portrait. His gaze travelled across Alfred, Nerissa, the painted relations, the empty logic of the arrangement. Then he looked at Tabitha, not at her gown, not at the silver beginning in her hair, at her face. There was no pity in his expression, which startled her more than kindness would have done. Nerissa stepped forward with practiced grace. Your Grace, how good of you to join us. We were about to begin the quadrille. So I see. Montague removed his gloves one finger at a time. For one dangerous moment, Tabitha thought he might rebuke Aubrey publicly, and every muscle in her body tightened against becoming the centerpiece of a duke's charity. He did not. He crossed the room. People made space before him without being asked. He stopped in front of Tabitha and bowed. Lady Tabitha. Her own name sounded unexpectedly distinct in his voice. Your Grace. His eyes held hers. Will you give me the opening quadrille? The room went very still. Tabitha knew exactly what everyone saw, the omitted woman beneath the portrait, the most powerful unmarried man present standing before her. Nerissa's smile fixed at the edges. Aubrey, no longer smiling at all. Montague did not extend his hand, as though the answer were already his. He waited. That, more than the invitation, decided her. Yes, Tabitha said. I will. Something shifted in his expression. Approval, perhaps, or relief that she had answered for herself. He offered his arm only after she moved toward him. They began across the ballroom as the musicians lifted their bows. Behind them, conversation had not yet recovered. When they were far enough from the portrait that Tabitha could no longer feel its painted absence above her, Montague bent his head slightly. "Did you truly miss the sittings?" he asked. Tabitha looked at him. There was no mockery in his face, and no easy reassurance either. Only a question. "No," she said. "I remember both. Sur, the musicians began the quadrille before Tabitha could decide whether the Duke of Westmarsh had asked his question out of curiosity or courtesy. Around them, pairs took their places beneath the chandeliers, silk skirts settling into ordered lines, while gentlemen adjusted their gloves and offered the precise bows expected of them. Montague stood opposite her for the opening figure. He did not repeat his question. He simply waited. That patience unsettled her more than insistence would have done. Tabitha had spent years answering questions that were not truly questions. Would she mind changing seats? Would she prefer to remain at home? Surely she did not care for dancing anymore. Every polite sentence had carried its own required answer. Montague had asked whether she remembered the sittings, and his silence suggested that whatever she said next would be allowed to belong to her. "The first was on the 17th of March, she said as the couples moved forward. Mr. Bellamy complained that the light from the western windows changed too quickly after 4 o'clock. Montague's gloved hand met hers for the first turn of the figure. The contact was formal and brief, no more intimate than custom permitted. Yet Tabitha became unexpectedly aware of the steadiness of his fingers beneath the thin kid leather. He released her exactly when the dance required it. "You remember the date?" he asked when they faced again. "I remember Alfred being annoyed because he had promised to dine at White's. Nerissa wore blue satin and disliked the shade Mr. Bellamy chose for the painted curtain. That sounds difficult to invent by accident. I haven't reached the difficult part." His mouth shifted, almost a smile. "Please don't spare me." The next figure carried them apart and returned them. Tabitha found herself measuring the difference between being watched and being observed. The ballroom watched her now because a duke had chosen her. Montague seemed interested in details that had existed before his arrival. "The second sitting was on the 9th of April, she continued. The green velvet stool had been moved nearer the painted column. My left hand rested on it because Mr. Bellamy said the arrangement needed weight on that side. Nerissa thought the effect too severe and asked whether I might hold a book instead." "Did you?" "No," Mr. Bellamy said. The book looked contrived. This time Montague did smile. It altered his face more than Tabitha expected. Not by making him younger, but by making him less distant. A portraitist with principles. London should treasure him while it can. He also asked me to turn my head 3 times, because apparently my natural expression suggested that I had discovered something disappointing. "Had you?" "Probably." The answer escaped before Tabitha could make it. "Proper." Montague's eyes warmed. A tiny answering amusement stirred inside her, unwelcome only because it felt easy. The dance carried his hand to hers again. For one measured beat their palms met, separated by gloves and ceremony. The awareness was sharper now because she had anticipated it. Tabitha withdrew with the movement, neither lingering nor rushing. Montague did the same. "And no one told you the final arrangement had changed?" he asked. "No, you never asked to be removed?" "No." "You never missed either sitting?" "No." He inclined his head. "Then the question is not whether you remember being there." Tabitha held his gaze. "It is why everyone else finds it convenient to suggest I wasn't." The music covered the small silence that followed. Montague did not contradict her. He did not offer the soothing nonsense that Nerissa would have preferred. Perhaps the painter forgot. Perhaps the composition changed. Perhaps no insult was intended. Instead he said, "Yes, one word, nothing more." It gave her more comfort than reassurance would have done. By the time the quadrille ended, Tabitha knew that half the room had watched every turn. She also knew, with a faint astonishment, that for several minutes she had forgotten to care. Montague bowed. She curtsied. His hand did not reach for hers beyond what etiquette required. Even that restraint registered. They had barely stepped clear of the dancers when Aubrey approached. Nerissa followed a few paces behind him. Smiling at acquaintances as though she had no interest whatever in what her brother might say. "Well," Aubrey said, "His Grace has accomplished what the portraitist could not." Tabitha felt the old weariness return. Montague looked at him. "Have I? You've made Lady Tabitha memorable for an evening." Aubrey's grin invited laughter from two gentlemen nearby. Neither quite provided it. Tabitha was preparing to answer when Montague spoke first. "I was under the impression that we were discussing the painter's omission." Aubrey lifted one shoulder, a harmless mistake. Then it should be easily explained. Something in Montague's tone changed the air. Not anger. Precision. Aubrey's grin thinned. "Surely you don't propose an investigation into missing brushstrokes?" "I propose nothing." Montague glanced toward Tabitha, then toward Alfred, who had approached after seeing the small knot of attention forming. "Lord Stedham, your sister says she attended both sittings." Alfred shifted his weight. "Yes, well, I imagine there was some change in the composition." "Perhaps." Montague's voice remained mild. "Then her account deserves a direct answer from Mr. Bellamy." Nerissa had reached them now. For the first time that evening, her expression changed before she could control it. It was not fear. It was irritation, sharpened by something closer to alarm. "Your Grace," she said, "surely Lady Tabitha doesn't wish to turn an artistic decision into a family controversy." Montague did not look at Nerissa immediately. He looked at Tabitha. "Do you?" The simplicity of the question landed almost physically. Nerissa had spoken about what Tabitha wished. Montague asked her. Tabitha folded her hands lightly before her. "I wish to know why I was removed." Alfred frowned. "Removed is rather a strong word. I was present when the work began," Tabitha said. "I am absent now. Until I know what occurred between those two facts, removed seems accurate enough." Aubrey gave a quiet laugh. "You're making rather a great deal of this." Tabitha turned to him. "Then you should have no objection to my finding a small answer." Montague's gaze remained on her, and the almost smile returned, though this time it carried approval rather than amusement, Nerissa noticed. Tabitha saw that clearly. Her sister-in-law's fingers tightened once around the stem of her closed fan. "Mr. Bellamy is a busy man," Nerissa said. "There's no need to inconvenience him." "If he painted the portrait," Montague replied, "I suspect he can survive one question about it." Alfred exhaled. "I shall write to him." "No." The word left Tabitha before she had fully planned it. Everyone looked at her, even Montague. She felt the room waiting to see whether she would retreat. She did not. "Thank you, Alfred, but I will ask him myself." Nerissa's face went still. Aubrey's amusement disappeared completely. Alfred looked more puzzled than offended. "You?" "I was the one who sat for him." Tabitha felt the small morocco case in her reticule against her wrist, but she did not touch it this time. She needed no borrowed courage from memory. "The question is mine." Montague said nothing for a moment. Then he bowed to her with a formality that somehow felt less like ceremony than acknowledgement. "Then I hope you receive an honest answer." Tabitha met his eyes. "So do I." Across the room, The family portrait remained bright beneath the candles, 5 painted figures holding their appointed places, as though nothing had ever been missing. Tabitha looked at it once, then turned away. Tomorrow, she would send her card to Mr. Bellamy's studio. She would not ask Alfred to speak for her, and she would not allow Nerissa to decide that the matter was too trivial to pursue. Someone had altered the picture of her family. Tabitha intended to discover who had decided that the easiest figure to erase was hers. On the morning of the 22nd May, Lady Tabitha Thurlow discovered that being erased from a family portrait was worse when one could see the exact place where one had once existed. Mr. Bellamy's studio stood in a quiet London street, behind an unassuming dark door, far removed from the chandeliers and polished laughter of Stedham House. Tabitha had sent her card the previous morning and received his reply before dinner. He would see her at 11, provided she came properly accompanied. Her widowed maternal aunt sat near the studio window now, occupied with a small book while remaining close enough to satisfy every requirement of propriety. Mr. Bellamy had greeted Tabitha with the strained courtesy of a man who already knew why she had come. Paintings leaned against walls in various stages of completion. The room smelled faintly of oil, wood, and turpentine. A north-facing window gave the light a cool steadiness that made evasion seem almost difficult. "You attended both sittings, Mr. Bellamy said before Tabitha had finished removing her gloves. Tabitha looked at him. "Then, at least we may begin without arguing over that." Colour rose beneath the portraitist's narrow cheekbones. "I never intended anyone to suggest otherwise. Sir Aubrey Crewe suggested it rather effectively. I heard something of last evening. London is efficient when kindness isn't required." Her aunt looked up from her book but wisely said nothing. Mr. Bellamy rubbed one thumb along the edge of a paint-stained cloth. "Lady Tabitha, I should have written to you." "About what?" He hesitated. That hesitation gave her the answer before he spoke. "About the alteration." Tabitha felt her breathing become more deliberate. She had expected an explanation involving balance, composition, perhaps some artistic decision she would dislike but understand. She had not expected that word, alteration. "Please show me, Mr." Bellamy crossed to a narrow cabinet at the far side of the studio. He unlocked it, searched among several panels, and withdrew a small mahogany board no longer than his forearm. He carried it with both hands and placed it upright on a wooden support. It was an oil composition study, rougher than the finished portrait, but unmistakable in arrangement. Alfred occupied the center. Nerissa sat beside him. The other family figures held the same positions. Tabitha had seen reproduced in the completed canvas. There were 6 people. Tabitha stood at the far left. Even in the unfinished study, she recognized the line of her dark gown, the green velvet stool beneath her hand, and the angle of her head that Mr. Bellamy had corrected 3 times during the second sitting. For several moments, she could not speak. She had thought the finished portrait cruel because it denied her presence. This small painted board did something stranger. It proved her presence had once been accepted, considered, and deliberately removed. Her aunt closed her book. "That is certainly you." "Yes," Tabitha said. The word came quietly. Mr. Bellamy looked miserable. The preliminary arrangement was approved after the second sitting. Tabitha turned toward him. "By whom?" Lord Stedham raised no objection. The Countess directed most of the domestic details of the commission, and afterward, Mr. Bellamy went back to the cabinet. This time he removed a thin portfolio tied with tape. He opened it on his work table, but did not hand it to her. I keep correspondence relating to important commissions. It prevents disputes over alterations. He selected one sheet. Nerissa's hand was familiar to Tabitha before she saw the signature. The penmanship was elegant, decisive, and almost aggressively controlled. Mr. Bellamy angled the page so Tabitha and her aunt could read it without removing it from his possession. The instruction was brief. Lady Tabitha was to be omitted from the final composition because she would not remain with the Stedham household after June. The balance of the group should therefore be adjusted around the remaining family members. Tabitha read it twice. She did not need to. When was this sent? 3 days after the second sitting. Did anyone tell you that I requested it? No. Did anyone show you a letter from me? No. Did my brother give the instruction? No. The Countess wrote under the authority she had already exercised over the details of the commission. I had no reason to imagine the family arrangement was disputed. Tabitha looked again at the painted study. 6 figures, then 5, not forgotten, removed. The distinction hurt with a clarity almost preferable to uncertainty. I want the study preserved exactly as it is, she said. Of course. And this letter, Mr. Bellamy straightened slightly. Both will remain here. Good. She had no wish to carry evidence through London in a reticule, nor to create a second question about custody when one already existed. Please don't give either to anyone without first informing me. Mr. Bellamy paused. They are my studio records, Lady Tabitha, but I can promise they won't be destroyed or altered. That is all I ask. Her aunt rose. And the finished portrait, completed according to the later instruction. Mr. Bellamy's discomfort deepened. I believed the removal reflected a change in residence, perhaps a marriage. Tabitha's attention sharpened. Why a marriage? The wording only said you would not remain with the Stedham household after June. I made an assumption. There it was again. Another life built out of assumptions. Everyone apparently informed except the woman expected to live it. Tabitha put on her gloves. Thank you for showing me the truth. Lady Tabitha, I am sorry. She looked at the small figure painted at the edge of the mahogany panel. So am I. By late afternoon, Stedham House had acquired the hushed order that followed morning calls and preceded evening engagements. When the butler announced the Duke of Westmarsh, Tabitha was in the drawing room with her aunt and Alfred, which made Montague's visit entirely proper and inconveniently welcome. He greeted the others before turning to her. Lady Tabitha, Your Grace. His eyes rested on her face for one measured instant. You saw Mr. Bellamy. It was not phrased as a demand. Tabitha nodded. I did. Montague waited. She had begun to understand that waiting was one of his more unusual forms of courtesy. There was an earlier composition study, she said. 6 figures. I was one of them. Alfred lowered the newspaper he had been pretending to read. Montague's expression became still. Then the finished picture was altered. Yes, 3 days after the second sitting, Nerissa instructed Mr. Bellamy to remove me. Alfred rose halfway from his chair. Nerissa, did what? Tabitha looked at him. She wrote that I would not remain with the Stedham household after June. Alfred sat back slowly. That makes no sense. Not to me. Montague said nothing until Alfred's surprise had settled into troubled silence. Then he asked, Did Mr. Bellamy preserve the instruction? Yes, it remains in his commission file. The study remains in his studio as well. Something like approval moved through Montague's gaze. You left both there. They are his records, sensibly done. Tabitha almost smiled. You sound disappointed that I didn't carry a wet oil panel through Mayfair. Devastated. His dry answer drew the smile from her before she could prevent it. The moment lasted only a breath, but it changed the room around them. Montague's expression softened in response. "So," he said, quieter now, "you weren't forgotten." Tabitha looked toward the drawing-room door, beyond which Nerissa's footsteps could sometimes be heard directing some invisible matter of household importance. "No, I was removed." Montague held her gaze. Conversation shifted when Alfred began asking when Nerissa might return. Yet several minutes later, as Montague prepared to leave, he paused beside Tabitha once more. "Lady Tabitha, yes, being removed rather than forgotten is not a smaller injury merely because someone intended it." She stared at him. He had repeated her words exactly, not their general meaning. Not a softened approximation, the precise distinction she had made. It was a small thing, perhaps, yet she had spent half a lifetime watching her own words return to her altered by other people's convenience. "You remembered," she said. Montague's eyes did not leave hers. "I was listening." Then he bowed and took his leave, while one unanswered phrase remained behind him like a door someone had quietly opened. After June, Nerissa had known, or believed she knew, that Tabitha would no longer belong in the Stedham household after June. Tabitha had no intention of leaving, which meant someone else had already planned a future for her, Sewer. By the afternoon of the 24th May, the family portrait had become the one subject no one at Stedham House wished to discuss in Lady Tabitha Thurlow's presence, which meant that it occupied every conversation the moment she left a room. Servants carried tea through the drawing-room with studied discretion. Alfred had gone out on business. Nerissa sat near the windows. With embroidery she had not advanced by more than 3 stitches in 20 minutes. Tabitha had taken the chair nearest the small writing table, where she was answering a note from her aunt, when the butler entered and announced the Duke of Westmarsh. Nerissa's needle stopped, only for an instant. Then she smiled with the practiced warmth of a hostess who had never in her life been surprised by anything. Montague entered with the proper formality of an afternoon caller, greeted Nerissa first as mistress of the house, then turned toward Tabitha. "Lady Tabitha, Your Grace." She had seen him only 2 days earlier, yet the sight of him produced a small, unmistakable shift in her breathing. She disliked noticing it. More troubling still, she suspected he noticed everything. Nerissa invited him to sit, and immediately began speaking of Lady Westbury's musicale, the weather, and a parliamentary dinner, about which Tabitha knew almost nothing, and cared less. Montague answered with enough dry civility to satisfy etiquette, while contributing so little encouragement that the conversation slowly exhausted itself. When Nerissa finally asked whether he wished for more tea, he said, "No, thank you. I came partly because Lady Tabitha mentioned something 2 days ago that I have continued to think about." Nerissa's hand tightened around the teapot handle before she set it down. Tabitha met Montague's eyes. "The portrait?" "Not precisely." He turned slightly toward her. "The distinction you made." Tabitha waited, removed rather than forgotten. He remembered it again, not the general subject. The exact difference. "I didn't realize it had become so memorable," she said. "Certain sentences deserve the effort." Nerissa gave a small laugh. "You encourage her, Your Grace." Tabitha has always possessed a talent for making ordinary inconveniences sound philosophical. Montague looked toward Nerissa. Perhaps ordinary inconveniences become philosophical when repeated often enough. The words were mild. Nerissa's smile did not alter, but her needle went through the same piece of silk twice. Tabitha looked down to hide the beginning of amusement. "Mr. Bellamy's evidence has not changed," she said. "The study remains at his studio. So does the written instruction." "Good. You approve of my leaving it there?" "I approve of evidence remaining where its custody cannot conveniently become another argument." Tabitha glanced at him. "That is almost suspiciously sensible. Please don't spread it about. I have a reputation to maintain." She laughed before she could stop herself. It was not loud, but it was genuine. Montague's expression softened. Across the room, Nerissa's needle stopped again. This time she did not resume immediately. Tabitha noticed. So did Montague, though he gave no sign. Nerissa rose. "I must speak with Mrs. Dale about tomorrow's dinner." "Your Grace, forgive me. I shall return directly." She did not ask whether Tabitha wished to remain. That small omission felt almost deliberate. Yet the drawing-room door remained open. Servants passed through the corridor, and the house was awake around them. Nothing in the arrangement violated propriety. Montague waited until Nerissa had gone before speaking again. "You said the letter claimed you would no longer live here after June." "Yes, and you still have no explanation." "No. Does that frighten you?" Tabitha considered lying, not because she distrusted him, but because admitting fear had always seemed like handing someone a tool and hoping they did not use it. "It unsettles me." "That is not quite the same answer." No, he did not press. The restraint itself loosened something in her. "It frightens me less that Nerissa expected me to leave than that she believed she had the right to arrange the fact before telling me." Montague's gaze grew still. Yes. There was something in the word she had heard before, some understanding too immediate to be theoretical. Tabitha studied him. "You speak as though you know the feeling." A shadow of humor crossed his face and disappeared. "I know another version of it, being removed from portraits." "Thankfully, no. I am told my nose is expensive to reproduce." She smiled, but he did not retreat completely behind the joke. "Being forgotten may be cruel," he continued. "Being remembered inaccurately can be its own kind of prison." Tabitha watched him more carefully. "Who remembers you inaccurately?" "Most of London, on a diligent day." "That sounds exhausting." "It saves introductions." His mouth curved, but his eyes did not. There was pain there, controlled, old, and deliberately unnamed. Tabitha understood that he had offered her the existence of the wound without offering its history. She could have asked. Instead, she said, "Then perhaps we are opposites." "How so?" "People fail to remember me at all." "People remember you incorrectly." Montague looked at her for a long moment. "I am not certain which is kinder. Neither, I suspect." "No." Silence settled between them, but it did not feel empty. Tabitha reached toward the reticule lying beside her chair, almost without thinking. Her fingers touched the brown morocco case within. Montague's gaze followed the movement, but not invasively. "What is that?" he asked. Tabitha drew the little case out and rested it in her palm. "Something my mother kept." She opened it. Between two thin slips of glass lay a pressed sprig of rosemary, faded with age, but still retaining the delicate shape of its leaves. Montague leaned nearer, though he did not reach for it. "Rosemary, for remembrance. Your mother's?" "Yes. She used to keep fresh rosemary in a little pot near her sitting-room window. She said memory was a duty, not merely a talent." Tabitha smiled faintly. "I thought it terribly solemn when I was 12. And now? Now I think she may have been warning me." Montague's gaze remained on the fragile sprig. "May I?" It took Tabitha a moment to understand. He was asking permission to hold it. Such a small courtesy. Yet the case contained the last physical thing she associated entirely with her mother. No family crest, no inheritance dispute, no household expectation, just Rosemary. She placed the case in his open palm. His fingers closed carefully around its edges. He handled it as though age had made it precious rather than useless. "She must have mattered greatly to you," he said. "She did. Then I understand why you kept this." He offered it back. Tabitha reached for it. Their fingers met over the narrow case. Unlike the formal touch of the quadrille, there was no dance figure requiring contact, and no room of observers determining when it should end. Montague could have released the case at once. Tabitha could have taken it and withdrawn. Neither did. For the span of a breath, his fingers rested lightly against hers, deliberate and still. His eyes lifted to her face. There was a question in them, not spoken, because the moment did not require one. Tabitha did not pull away. Her thumb settled briefly against the edge of his gloved finger before she took the case fully into her possession. Only then did Montague lower his hand. The contact had been almost nothing. It had also been entirely chosen. Tabitha closed the case with more attention than necessary. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For asking." Something changed in his expression. "I am beginning to suspect that people have not asked you enough questions. They ask many. Questions to which they have already selected the answer do not count." Tabitha looked at him. "You may be more philosophical than I am." A dangerous accusation. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Nerissa returned, followed by the butler carrying a silver salver. Her gaze moved first to Montague, then to the Morocco case in Tabitha's hand. She saw nothing improper, because nothing improper had occurred. Yet her expression cooled by a degree. "A card for Lady Tabitha," the butler said. Tabitha took it. The name engraved across the front was familiar, Sir Aubrey Crewe. Beneath it, in his own hand, he had written a request for a formal conversation on the afternoon of the 26th. Montague did not ask to see the card. Nerissa did not need to. Her face had already become composed in the particular way Tabitha was beginning to distrust. Tabitha slipped the card beside the rosemary case in her reticule and looked at her sister-in-law. For the first time, the mysterious phrase in Mr. Bellamy's letter seemed to move from the past toward her. After June, someone had expected Tabitha's life to change. Sir Aubrey, apparently, had decided it was time to tell her how. Sewer. On the afternoon of the 26th of May, Sir Aubrey Crewe proposed marriage to Lady Tabitha Thurlow with the confidence of a man who believed her consent had become a formality before he entered the room. He had requested a formal conversation, and Stedham House had arranged it with perfect propriety. Nerissa sat at the far end of the drawing-room beside an open embroidery frame, close enough to satisfy convention yet distant enough to pretend she could not hear. The doors remained open. A footman passed the corridor at intervals. Aubrey stood near the hearth while Tabitha occupied the chair opposite him. Her hands folded calmly over her skirt. He spent the first several minutes discussing practical matters. His estate was respectable. His connections were satisfactory. He had no taste for fashionable extravagance. He considered himself old enough to value peace over romantic nonsense. Tabitha listened until she realized he was describing marriage as though she had asked for its terms. "Sir Aubrey," she said, "are you proposing to me?" He paused, visibly surprised by the question. "Of course I am. I wanted to be certain." A faint smile touched his mouth. "You needn't look so alarmed. I don't expect theatrics from you." How reassuring. He mistook the dryness for nervousness. We are both beyond the age for foolishness, Lady Tabitha. You require a secure establishment. I require a wife capable of managing one without turning every dinner into an exhibition. We know one another. Our families know one another. Nerissa has always believed the arrangement particularly suitable. Tabitha looked past him toward her sister-in-law. Nerissa had lowered her eyes to her embroidery. The needle was motionless. What arrangement? Tabitha asked. Aubrey frowned. Surely we needn't pretend there has been no understanding. Between whom? Between the families. That wasn't my question. His expression tightened. Tabitha leaned back slightly. What understanding exists between you and me? Aubrey stared as though she had deliberately made simple arithmetic difficult. Nerissa told me you understood what was expected. There it was, not affection, not even courtship expectation. A future constructed in rooms where Tabitha had apparently been unnecessary. And what precisely was expected, she asked, that when I spoke, you would be sensible, meaning I would accept, meaning you would recognize a respectable opportunity. Tabitha felt something inside her become very still. The portraitist's letter returned to her mind. After June, she saw the finished family portrait as clearly as if it hung before her now. 5 figures where 6 had once been planned. Nerissa had not merely believed Tabitha might leave. She had considered the destination decided. Did my brother tell you I had agreed? Tabitha asked, not in those words. Did I ever tell you I wished to marry you? You have never discouraged my attentions. You have never offered any that required discouragement. Aubrey's face colored. I have been patient. With what? With your situation. The answer was so revealing that for one moment Tabitha almost pitied him. He believed himself generous. My situation, she repeated. You are 35, Aubrey said, lowering his voice as though kindness required secrecy. You live in your brother's household. Society is not always charitable toward unmarried women who remain dependent on family goodwill. I am offering you security. And if I do not want it from you? His certainty finally cracked. You cannot mean that. I do. Tabitha, don't be absurd, she rose. Aubrey instinctively straightened. At the far end of the room, Nerissa put down her embroidery. I am not asking you to agree with my refusal, Tabitha said, only to understand it. I will not marry you. The silence that followed was almost clean. Aubrey looked toward Nerissa, which answered more questions than any confession could have done. Perhaps you require time, he said. I don't. You may regret answering hastily. I have answered clearly. Those are not the same thing. Nerissa stood. Tabitha, surely this needn't become unpleasant. Tabitha turned to her. It became unpleasant when everyone except me knew what I was supposed to do. Aubrey collected his gloves from the table. The civility in his face had hardened. You may find London remembers this conversation differently. Tabitha met his gaze. Then London will be wrong. He bowed with just enough formality to avoid insult and left the room. Nerissa waited until his footsteps disappeared before speaking. Do you understand what you have refused? Yes, that is why I refused it. Aubrey is a baronet of good family. Then I wish him joy of it. This is not amusing. No. Tabitha looked at her sister-in-law. It is not. Alfred entered 20 minutes later and found both women still in the drawing room, separated by a distance that felt larger than the room itself. He had scarcely removed his gloves before Nerissa told him what had happened. Her version lasted less than a minute and managed to make Tabitha sound impulsive, Aubrey wounded, and the entire misunderstanding inexplicable. Alfred looked at his sister. He proposed. Yes, And you refused, yes, but Nerissa said there was an understanding. Tabitha felt more sorrow than anger then. You believed that too? Alfred's expression changed. She said Aubrey intended to speak and that you knew. I knew nothing until his card arrived. He looked at Nerissa. You told me Tabitha understood. I believed she did. You believed. Tabitha said, Mr. Bellamy believed. Sir Aubrey believed. Alfred believed. It is extraordinary how many people can build a woman's future out of belief without once asking her a question. Alfred sat heavily. Is this why the portrait instruction said you would leave after June? Nerissa's face became cold. It was reasonable to anticipate the marriage. Before he proposed, Tabitha asked. Nerissa lifted her chin. You were hardly likely to receive a better offer. Something old and obedient inside, Tabitha finally broke, not violently but completely. Then hear me now. I will not leave this house merely because you planned for my absence. I am Alfred's sister. This was my father's house before it was yours, and I will not be made convenient by disappearing. Alfred looked at her with startled attention. Nerissa said nothing. For once, silence did not belong to Tabitha. Later that afternoon, Montague Staunton called, while Alfred remained at home, and two elderly visitors occupied the opposite side of the drawing room. Tabitha had not expected him, though she had begun to recognize the quiet lift in herself when his name was announced. He greeted Alfred, exchanged the required civilities, then turned to her. You look as though someone has tested your patience. Someone proposed marriage to me. Montague's brows rose. He did not ask who, I see. I refused. His gaze held hers. Was your answer heard? The question reached deeper than congratulations could have done. Eventually. Good. Only then, after Tabitha had been allowed to decide what mattered, did he ask, May I know who asked? Sir Aubrey Crewe. Something sharpened in Montague's face, but his voice remained controlled. And was he surprised? Profoundly. Apparently my future had been agreed upon by everyone who wasn't required to live it. Montague was silent for a moment. That explains June. Yes. Tabitha glanced toward Nerissa across the room. She had me removed from the portrait because she assumed I would soon belong elsewhere. And will you? No. She looked directly at him. I am staying. Montague did not praise her courage. He did something better. He accepted the decision as though it required no justification. Then I imagine Stedham House will have to become accustomed to remembering where you are. Tabitha almost smiled. It may prove difficult. His eyes warmed. I suspect you have already begun making it impossible. Sewer, on the afternoon of the 29th May, Lady Tabitha Thurlow entered Westmarsh House expecting a polite gathering and discovered, instead, that the Duke had built his drawing room around silence. It was not an empty silence. 8 other guests occupied the room, among them an elderly marchioness, 2 married couples, Tabitha's widowed maternal aunt, and a gentleman discussing some charitable subscription with Montague's secretary near the windows. Tea had been arranged on a low table. The doors to the adjoining room remained open. Nothing about the visit was improper, yet the room lacked the restless competition of Stedham House. No one seemed determined to fill every pause before another person could speak. Tabitha had begun to suspect that Montague preferred people who could survive a moment without performing for it. He crossed toward her after greeting her aunt. Lady Tabitha, Your Grace, I'm pleased you came. The words were simple enough, but he said them without the polished exaggeration of ordinary society. Tabitha felt the now familiar awareness of being addressed rather than managed. My aunt wished to inspect whether a duke could serve tea without national catastrophe. And Montague glanced toward the tea table. I believe we remain a constitutional monarchy. For the moment, his eyes warmed. Their humor had become easier in recent days. But Tabitha was increasingly aware that the ease rested over something neither of them had named. Nerissa's instruction to the portraitist remained at Mr. Bellamy's studio. The painted composition study remained there too. Aubrey's proposal had been refused. Tabitha had declared she would remain in her brother's household. Those facts should have brought satisfaction. Instead, she felt as though the ground beneath her had stopped moving only long enough for her to notice how tired she was. Montague seemed to see it. He did not ask in front of the others. He waited until the Marchioness had drawn Tabitha's aunt into a discussion of a niece's engagement, and until they had moved nearer the long windows, still fully visible to everyone in both rooms. "Has Sir Aubrey accepted your refusal?" he asked. "He has accepted that I said it." That sounds carefully phrased. It is. I am not convinced he has accepted that the answer belongs to me. Montague looked toward the garden beyond the glass. Men can be remarkably inventive when a woman's answer inconveniences them. "Experience?" she asked. The word was lightly spoken, but she saw the change in him immediately. His expression did not close. It became more honest. "Yes." Tabitha remembered his words at Stedham House. Being remembered inaccurately can be its own kind of prison. Until that moment, she had not known whether he would ever explain them. "You don't have to tell me," she said. Montague turned back to her. Something quiet passed through his face. "That may be why I want to." He took a breath before continuing. 5 years ago, I was engaged. Tabitha had heard rumors, as everyone had. A duke did not end a prominent engagement without leaving London enough material to discuss for a decade. I know what society says. I imagine society has improved it considerably. It usually does. The accepted version is that I grew bored, decided the lady was unsuitable, and ended the matter with all the tenderness of dismissing a groom. His mouth curved without humor. Some accounts include another woman. One included a French actress I had never met. London dislikes an empty space in a story. Exactly. Montague looked down briefly at his hands. The truth was much less entertaining. She loved someone else. Tabitha said nothing. She told me privately after our families had spent months arranging everything around us. Houses, settlements, invitations, expectations. Everyone was pleased, except the 2 people who were expected to marry. "Did you know before she told you?" "No." "What did you do?" "I ended the engagement." Tabitha watched him. "And you never explained why." "She asked me not to." "Because of the other man?" "Because her family would have made her life unbearable if they knew how long she had loved him. They already considered him beneath their ambitions. I could end the engagement and absorb the humiliation more easily than she could survive being named disloyal." His tone remained controlled, but Tabitha could hear what control cost him now. "So you allowed everyone to believe you had discarded her?" "Yes, for 5 years. Yes, and she married the man she loved." A real smile appeared then, small and almost private. "Eventually. Then you did something honorable." Montague shook his head. "I am not sure honor requires applause." "I did not offer applause." "No, you rarely offer anything so convenient." Tabitha looked at him for another moment. "But you have allowed the lie to become your entire reputation." His smile disappeared. "That was easier." "For whom?" The question landed between them. Montague looked toward the other guests. No one was listening. The Marchioness had begun an animated argument about wedding breakfasts. Still, he lowered his voice. For me, perhaps. Then that is not the same sacrifice. He absorbed the words without defensiveness. Tabitha continued carefully. Protecting her secret was honorable. Hiding every feeling you possess because London misjudged one decision is something else. Cowardice? I did not say that. You thought it. No. She met his eyes. I thought habit. That struck him more deeply. He went very still. Habit. People become accustomed to the shape that protects them. I became useful. Because useful women are rarely questioned about what they want. You became unreadable because unreadable men cannot easily be misrepresented twice. Montague let out a breath that was almost a laugh. You make me sound disappointingly simple. Most wounds are simpler than the defenses built around them. For several seconds, neither spoke. The space between them no longer felt like social quiet. It felt personal. Tabitha was suddenly aware that she had spoken to a duke with an intimacy she would once have considered impossible. Yet Montague showed no offense. Only recognition. You are forgotten, he said. I am remembered incorrectly. Opposite inconveniences. I am beginning to suspect neither is especially pleasant. No. His gaze rested on her face. There is something I have wondered. What? When everyone else failed to see you clearly, how did you avoid believing them? Tabitha's first instinct was to answer with wit. She let it pass. I did believe them sometimes. Montague did not move. Not that I was worthless, but that wanting more would make me ridiculous. It is easier to accept being overlooked when one pretends one never wished to be chosen. The last word seemed to alter the air. Tabitha felt heat rise faintly beneath her skin, but she did not withdraw from what she had said. Montague's expression changed too, not triumph. Something more vulnerable. And do you still pretend? He asked, than I did. A guest laughed in the adjoining room. A spoon touched porcelain. The ordinary sounds made their stillness feel sharper. Montague lowered his hand to the space between them, palm turned upward. He did not take hers. He offered. Tabitha looked at his gloved hand, then at his face. There was no urgency in him, no assumption. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers. The gesture was restrained enough that anyone glancing toward them might have mistaken it for ordinary reassurance. Tabitha did not. Neither, she thought, did he. They remained that way through one long silence. His thumb did not move across her glove. He made no attempt to draw her nearer. He simply held her hand as though steadiness itself could be given. Tabitha tightened her fingers once. Montague's eyes lifted to hers. The answering softness in his face unsettled her more than any practiced charm could have done. She had been touched politely 1,000 times, escorted through rooms, guided into carriages, partnered in dances. This felt different because neither custom nor necessity required it. She had chosen to put her hand in his, and he seemed to understand exactly what that meant. Footsteps approached from the adjoining room. They released each other at the same moment. No embarrassment followed, only awareness. Tabitha looked toward the mantel clock. Nerissa is holding a supper at Stedham House on the 1st of June. I received the invitation this morning. She intends the portrait to be discussed. Montague's expression sharpened. You are certain? She told Alfred that the unfortunate misunderstanding must be settled before it becomes gossip. It is already gossip. Nerissa prefers gossip she has arranged herself. Montague almost smiled, but concern remained beneath it. Do you want me there? Tabitha considered the question. Once she might have answered according to what seemed least troublesome. Now she answered according to truth. Yes, his gaze held hers. Then I will be there. She looked toward the open drawing-room doors, where her aunt was now signaling that departure would soon be proper. The comfort of Montague's hand remained in her own even after the contact had ended. On the 1st of June, Nerissa intended to explain the portrait before a room full of people. For the first time, Tabitha wondered whether her sister-in-law's purpose was not merely to defend an old decision. Perhaps Nerissa intended to teach society which version of Lady Tabitha Thurlow it was expected to remember. Sewer. On the evening of the 1st of June, Lady Tabitha Thurlow learned that a lie spoken gently could be more dangerous than an insult shouted across a ballroom. Stedham House had filled for supper beneath the same family portrait that had become impossible to ignore. Candles burned along the walls, silver gleamed beneath crystal, and the painted faces above the drawing-room mantel seemed almost serenely indifferent to the conversations gathering below. Tabitha had dressed with unusual care, not because she wished to impress the people who had spent a fortnight discussing her absence from a canvas, but because she refused to appear as though she had come, expecting defeat. Her dark blue silk required no apology. Her mother's rosemary remained safely inside the brown morocco case in her reticule. The original composition study, Nerissa's written instruction, and Mr. Bellamy's studio records all remained exactly where they belonged, in the portraitist's custody. Tabitha had brought no evidence into the room because Nerissa had not yet admitted there was anything to prove. Montague arrived before supper and greeted her with no intimacy beyond what society permitted. Their eyes met, and Tabitha remembered the quiet weight of his hand around hers 3 days earlier. Neither attempted to repeat that moment. It had belonged to Westmarsh House, freely chosen and privately understood. Tonight required something different. Montague took his place among the guests, while Tabitha remained near Alfred. Nerissa moved through the room with remarkable ease. If she was anxious, she had dressed the feeling beautifully. Sir Aubrey Crewe stood near the portrait, speaking to 2 gentlemen as though his rejected proposal had never occurred. That composure disturbed Tabitha more than anger would have done. Supper proceeded without incident until Lady Harbury, a widow, with an unfortunate devotion to direct questions, looked from the portrait to Tabitha and said, "My dear, has anyone discovered how the painter managed to lose you?" The table quieted by degrees. Nerissa placed her wineglass down. "I am relieved you asked," she said. "The matter has become unnecessarily uncomfortable." Tabitha turned toward her. Alfred frowned. "Nerissa." His wife smiled at him. "Surely it is better to end the misunderstanding." Montague sat several places away, his attention fixed on Nerissa without appearing theatrical about it. Nerissa continued. There was never any intention to slight Tabitha. She had simply expected not to remain part of the Stedham household arrangement for much longer. Mr. Bellamy was informed accordingly. Tabitha felt the first tightening beneath her ribs. "By whom?" she asked. Nerissa's expression remained sympathetic. "By me, naturally. I was managing the commission." "That was not my question." A few guests shifted. Nerissa's smile thinned. "Then perhaps I misunderstood you. You said I expected not to remain here. Who told you that I expected it?" Aubrey answered before Nerissa could. "You did, in effect." Tabitha turned toward him. "When? Must we really rehearse every private conversation? If you intend to use one to explain my disappearance from a family portrait, yes." Aubrey's face showed patient regret. It was an excellent expression. You spoke more than once as though your future would soon be different. Different how? Settled. There was the word again, not chosen. Settled. Nerissa leaned slightly forward. Tabitha, no one is accusing you of anything. I believe you have simply forgotten how certain matters were discussed. The cruelty entered so softly that for 1 second Tabitha almost missed it. Forgotten, she repeated. My dear, you have forgotten. Several faces turned toward Tabitha with new interest. The problem was no longer whether Nerissa had acted without permission. It was whether Tabitha could be trusted to know what permission she had given. Aubrey sighed as though pained by the necessity. You spoke as if an understanding existed. No formal promise, perhaps, but certainly an expectation. An expectation held by whom? By people who cared about your future. That was not what I asked. His jaw tightened. Tabitha became aware of Montague rising from his chair. He did not approach. He merely stood where she could see him. Lady Tabitha, he said. Every eye in the room moved toward the Duke. His voice remained calm. Do you want me to say anything further? It would have been easy to let him, easier than standing beneath that portrait while a room full of people silently measured her memory. A duke's word could change the balance in an instant. Tabitha looked at him. 3 days earlier, she had told him she wanted him at this supper. He had come. Now he was offering strength without assuming the right to use it. No, she said. Montague inclined his head. Very well. He sat down again. That simple obedience steadied her more than any defense could have done. Tabitha turned back to Nerissa. I attended both sittings. Nerissa opened her mouth. Tabitha continued before she could interrupt. I never requested that Mr. Bellamy remove me. I never told you that I wished to be removed, and I never accepted Sir Aubrey. The last sentence landed hardest. Aubrey's face altered. No one said you formally accepted me. Then do not describe my future as settled. Nerissa spoke more gently still. Tabitha, memory is not always as exact as confidence makes it seem. Tabitha felt heat climb beneath her skin. She had always trusted memory because memory had been one of the few things no one could take from her. Dates, words, small details others neglected. Now Nerissa was transforming that strength into vanity. If Tabitha insisted too fiercely, she would appear obsessed with being infallible. If she retreated, Nerissa's version would remain. She drew one measured breath. Then we need not debate every word ever spoken, she said. 3 facts are enough. I attended the sittings. I did not ask to be removed. I refused Sir Aubrey when he proposed. Alfred looked at Aubrey. You were refused. Aubrey's mouth tightened. She answered unexpectedly. Expectedly is not unclearly, Tabitha said. Lady Harbury lowered her spoon with a small click. Somewhere farther down the table, a gentleman looked suddenly interested in his plate. Nerissa's composure finally developed a crack. You are making a family matter unnecessarily public. You made it public when you hung the result over the room. Silence followed. Tabitha had not raised her voice. She did not need to. The portrait remained above them. 5 painted figures, offering mute testimony to a decision no one had asked her to make. Montague's gaze met hers across the table. There was no rescue in it, only belief. That should have comforted her completely. Instead, a new uncertainty entered beside the comfort. Did he believe her because he knew her, or because her injury resembled his own? Had they begun to know one another, or merely recognized familiar wounds? The question disturbed her precisely because his belief mattered now. Nerissa broke the silence by signaling for the next course. Conversation resumed in fragments, but the evening never recovered its ease. Later, when guests began moving toward the drawing room, Aubrey approached Tabitha near the doorway. He kept enough distance to preserve propriety and lowered his voice so only she could hear. "You seem very certain of your memory." Tabitha looked at him. "About refusing you, yes." His smile was small and unpleasantly calm. "London may be curious to discover whether your certainty extends to everything." She felt the warning before she understood its shape. "What does that mean?" "Only that no one remembers every detail correctly, Lady Tabitha." He bowed. "And people who build their dignity upon being right should be careful never to be wrong." He walked away before she could answer. Across the room, Montague was speaking with Alfred, unaware of the words just exchanged. Tabitha remained beneath the painted faces of her family and felt, for the first time, a flicker of fear, not that she had forgotten something important, but that Aubrey intended to find something unimportant she had forgotten and make London believe it proved everything else. Sewer. By the afternoon of the 3rd of June, Lady Tabitha Thurlow had become an amusement at other people's morning calls. The change was subtle enough that anyone accused of cruelty could have denied it. No one called her unstable. No one directly said she had invented the portrait sittings or Sir Aubrey's proposal. Instead, respectable people began asking questions. At Lady Wellingham's drawing room, a woman Tabitha had known for 12 years smiled over the rim of her teacup and asked whether the Carmichael musicale had taken place on the 10th of February or the 11th. Another guest wanted to know which flowers had stood in the entrance hall at a dinner the previous autumn. A gentleman who had never before shown the smallest interest in Tabitha's opinions suddenly asked whether Lord Dacre had worn a blue waistcoat or a grey one at an assembly in January. Each question arrived, wrapped in laughter. Each answer was watched. Aubrey did not need to announce what he was doing. He merely sat near enough to hear. Tabitha understood by the third question. Her memory had become a public game. "Really, Lady Tabitha," Lady Wellingham said, smiling, "you've made us all feel terribly careless. I barely remember what I ate yesterday." "A useful mercy," Tabitha replied. "Most meals improve when forgotten." A few people laughed. Aubrey did not. He leaned against the chimney-piece with the ease of a man enjoying a performance he believed he had arranged. "But Lady Tabitha remembers everything," he said. "That is what makes her account of recent events so compelling." The word compelling was chosen carefully. It could sound complimentary if repeated later. Tabitha looked at him. "No one remembers everything. Surely you remember more than most." "Often. Then perhaps you can settle something for me." She could have refused. Instead, pride made the decision before wisdom could intervene. "What?" Aubrey smiled. "Lady Fenmore's supper in February. The one at which Lord Peter Ascham proposed the toast to the Queen. Was it on the 12th or the 13th? Tabitha remembered the supper. She remembered the yellow damask walls, the overcooked sole, and Lord Ascham dropping his napkin before rising. She remembered Nerissa complaining afterward that the drive home had been unusually slow. "The 12th," she said. Aubrey's smile widened by almost nothing. "The 13th." A small silence formed. Lady Wellingham glanced toward another woman. "Are you certain, Sir Aubrey?" "Entirely. I had been at my solicitor's on the 12th. The appointment remains in his book." Tabitha felt the room change around her. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. Nothing had happened except that she had named the wrong date of an irrelevant dinner 4 months earlier. Yet everyone understood what Aubrey wanted the mistake to mean. She searched her own memory and found the answer almost immediately. The supper had indeed been on the 13th. Nerissa had complained on the 12th about a different engagement. 2 similar evenings had folded together. One day, one harmless day. Her stomach tightened as though she had betrayed herself. Aubrey tilted his head. Even excellent memories have their little accidents. Tabitha looked at him. Yes. The simplicity of her answer seemed to disappoint him. Then perhaps certainty should sometimes be worn more lightly. About February suppers, certainly. And other matters? There it was. The invitation to defend everything at once. The portrait, Aubrey's proposal, Nerissa's instruction, her own mind. Tabitha felt the first pulse of panic beneath her ribs. If she answered too quickly, she would sound desperate. If she remained silent, they would make silence into doubt. She had spent years being ignored, and now, perversely, found herself longing for the safety of invisibility. Then another thought arrived, quieter and stronger. She did not need to remember every February supper correctly to know whether she had consented to being removed from her own family portrait. She did not need to recall every waistcoat in London to know she had refused Aubrey. The realization did not erase the humiliation. It changed its shape. "You are right about one thing," she said. Aubrey raised his brows. "Only one? I remembered the date incorrectly." Lady Wellingham blinked. Tabitha continued. "That seems to have pleased you enormously, so I hope you enjoy it properly." A reluctant smile appeared on one gentleman's face. Aubrey's did not. "My point is only that memory is fallible." "Of course it is." "Then your certainty concerning the portrait does not depend upon my remembering every supper I have attended." His mouth tightened. Tabitha rose, not fleeing, but ending the game. "I do not need to prove that I have never been mistaken. I need only prove whether I asked Mr. Bellamy to remove me." Aubrey's gaze sharpened. "You seem very confident. Less than I was yesterday." The admission surprised everyone, including Tabitha, but I am also less frightened by that. She curtsied to Lady Wellingham, thanked her for the call, and left with her aunt before another question could be turned into entertainment. The mistake followed Tabitha back to Stedham House before her carriage did. By the time she entered the drawing-room that afternoon, Nerissa had already heard. "I understand there was some confusion about a date," Nerissa said. She was seated near the windows with correspondence spread before her. Tabitha removed her gloves. "There was no confusion. I gave the wrong one." Nerissa looked almost disappointed by the lack of defense. "And yet you have been so very certain lately. About things that matter. That is convenient. Truth often is." Alfred entered from the adjoining room before Nerissa could reply. Montague followed him. Tabitha stopped. She had not known the Duke was calling. The sight of him brought immediate relief, followed so swiftly by caution that she resented both feelings. He had believed her from the beginning. But why? Because he knew her, or because a woman remembered incorrectly by society fit too neatly beside a man remembered incorrectly by society. Montague greeted her, then studied her face. Something happened, not a question disguised as knowledge. An observation. Tabitha sat. "I remembered a date incorrectly." Alfred looked puzzled. "What date?" "A supper in February." "Why does that matter?" "It does not." Nerissa folded one letter. "Some people may think it speaks to a broader concern." Montague's expression hardened slightly. "Some people," Tabitha answered before Nerissa could. "Aubrey." Montague turned back to her. "What did he do?" "He arranged a small examination of my memory during a morning call. I failed one question. You are not a schoolgirl, no. But I behaved like one for several minutes. She met his eyes. I thought if I could answer everything correctly, then no one could question the important things. Montague remained silent. She appreciated him for it. But I cannot remember everything, she continued. No one can, and I will not make my dignity depend upon pretending otherwise. Alfred's face softened with something close to shame. Nerissa looked away. Montague asked, "What do you intend to do? Not what shall we do? Not what should be done. What do you intend?" Tabitha felt the distinction. I intend to prove only the material point. Whether I ask to be removed from the portrait. The composition study, Alfred said, and Nerissa's instruction. Nerissa's head lifted. Tabitha kept her attention on Alfred. You have never seen them. No, then you should. Alfred frowned. You want me to go to Bellamy's studio? Yes. Why? Because you are my brother, and before this becomes another drawing room contest between memories, I want you to see what exists outside anyone's recollection. Alfred was quiet for several seconds. Very well. Montague spoke only after Alfred had agreed. If you require anything from me, ask. Tabitha looked at him. Part of her wanted him to offer more. Another part needed to know he would not. Thank you. Their eyes held. He made no move toward her hand, and she did not seek his. This was not the moment for reassurance disguised as intimacy. She needed the harder comfort of choosing her own next step. I do have one question, she said. For me, yes. Montague waited. Do you believe me because you know me, or because what happened to me resembles what happened to you? The room seemed to contract. Alfred looked down. Even Nerissa became still. Montague did not answer quickly. Tabitha was glad. I do not know you well enough yet to pretend the question is simple, he said at last. But I know this much. I believed you before I knew the details of your wound, because you answered questions you could have avoided and asked questions other people wanted buried. His gaze did not leave hers. If resemblance brought me closer, it did not create what I saw. Tabitha breathed slowly. It was not a declaration. She did not want one yet. It was better because it left uncertainty alive without letting fear rule it. She turned to Alfred. Tomorrow, will you come with me to Mr. Bellamy's studio? Alfred nodded. Yes. For the first time since Aubrey had exposed her harmless mistake, Tabitha felt the ground steady beneath her. She had been wrong about one day in February. That fact could remain true. So could another. Somewhere in a London studio, 6 figures still stood together on a small mahogany panel, and one of them was unmistakably Lady Tabitha Thurlow. On the morning of the 4th of June, Alfred Thurlow entered Mr. Bellamy's studio, believing he had come to inspect a family misunderstanding, and left knowing that his silence had helped create one. Tabitha sat beside her widowed maternal aunt, while Mr. Bellamy unlocked the same narrow cabinet he had opened during her first visit. Alfred stood near the work table, hat in hand, looking distinctly uncomfortable among unfinished faces, paint boxes, and canvases turned toward the wall. He had spoken little during the carriage journey. Tabitha had not tried to fill the silence for him. She had spent too many years making other people comfortable after they had failed her. Mr. Bellamy withdrew the small mahogany panel and placed it on the wooden support beneath the north window. 6 figures appeared in the painted study. Alfred leaned forward. His own likeness occupied the center. Nerissa sat beside him. The other relations held their places. At the far left stood Tabitha, one hand resting upon the green velvet stool she had described from memory. Alfred stared at the image for several seconds. That is you. Tabitha almost smiled at the unnecessary certainty of the statement. Yes, and this was made before the final portrait. Mr. Bellamy nodded. It was the approved composition after the second sitting, my lord. Alfred looked toward him. Approved by whom? The general arrangement had been accepted by the household. Her ladyship, the Countess, managed most subsequent details. My wife. Yes, my lord. Alfred returned his attention to the study. The expression on his face was not disbelief now. It was the slower, less comfortable recognition that disbelief had become impossible. Tabitha told me she sat twice. She did. Mr. Bellamy crossed to a shelf and brought down his sitting day book. He opened it upon the table. 17th of March, 9th of April. Tabitha did not move nearer. She remembered the dates without needing ink to reassure her. But part of what she had learned at Lady Wellingham's call was that memory did not become more honourable merely by refusing evidence. Alfred bent over the book. Mr. Bellamy's entries were economical. Names, times, notes on light, clothing, adjustments in composition. Beside the first sitting was a reference to fading western light. Beside the second, a note about altering the position of the green stool and rejecting the use of a book because the pose appeared contrived. Alfred read both lines. His gaze flicked toward Tabitha. You told me about the stool. Yes, and the book. I told His Grace about the book, but you remembered it before seeing this. Yes. Alfred's face tightened. Tabitha understood what he was trying to do. He was rebuilding belief from pieces, because belief had not come naturally enough when she first needed it. She felt no desire to punish him for the effort, but neither would she make it easy. The daybook proves I attended, she said. It does not prove why I disappeared. The news. Miss Bellamy closed the book. No, Lady Tabitha. The correspondence does that. He retrieved the portfolio Tabitha had seen during her first visit and untied it carefully. The original letter remained inside. The sheet had not moved into Tabitha's possession. No copy had appeared from nowhere. It had remained where Mr. Bellamy had promised it would remain, among the studio records concerning the Stedham Commission. He placed it flat on the table and angled it toward Alfred. This arrived 3 days after the second sitting. Alfred recognized the handwriting immediately. Nerissa. Yes, my lord. Tabitha had read the central instruction before. This time Mr. Bellamy allowed the letter to remain open while Alfred followed every line from salutation to signature. The wording was more explicit when read as a whole than the sentence. Tabitha had carried away from her first visit. Nerissa instructed the portraitist to omit Lady Tabitha from the final arrangement because, given the expected understanding with Sir Aubrey Crewe, Lady Tabitha would not remain a member of the Stedham household after June. The remaining figures were to be balanced accordingly. There was no request in Tabitha's hand, no statement that she had consented, no suggestion that anyone had asked her. Alfred read the letter twice. She wrote this before Aubrey proposed. Yes, Tabitha said. His eyes moved slowly from the paper to his sister. And you knew nothing of the proposed match. Nothing beyond the fact that Nerissa often praised Aubrey's suitability in the way she praises durable carpets. Alfred closed his eyes briefly. I knew she thought the match sensible. So did half the family, apparently. I assumed she had spoken to you. Tabitha looked at him. You assumed. He flinched, not dramatically, but enough. Yes. Mr. Bellamy moved a few paces away, giving brother and sister what privacy the open studio could reasonably permit. Tabitha's aunt remained near the window, present and discreet. Alfred placed one hand against the table. I should have asked you. Yes. I should have asked before the portrait was changed. Yes. He looked almost surprised that she had not softened the answer. You are not going to make this easier for me, are you? I have made things easier for other people for a very long time, Alfred. Her voice remained quiet. It has not improved their judgment. He lowered his gaze to the letter again. Did Nerissa believe you would accept him because she thought you had no other choice? You must ask Nerissa what she believed. And Aubrey? He proposed as though my answer had become an administrative detail. I corrected him. Something close to shame crossed Alfred's face. And I let all of this happen under my roof. You did not order my removal. No. But you enjoyed the convenience of believing someone else had discussed my future with me. He accepted that without protest. For the first time since the portrait had been unveiled, Tabitha felt that the truth was doing more than proving her right. It was forcing someone she loved to see the habits that had made her erasure possible. That mattered more than a perfect memory ever could. Alfred turned to Mr. Bellamy. I will require these records when this matter is addressed. Tabitha spoke before the portraitist could answer. No. Both men looked at her. The originals remain here. Alfred frowned. Tabitha, if we are to confront Nerissa, then Mr. Bellamy can bring them when the time comes. She looked to the portraitist. Is that acceptable? Entirely. The study remains in your custody. The sitting day book remains in your custody. The original instruction remains in your commission file. Nothing is removed, altered, recopied as a substitute original, or passed through the Stedham household before it is needed. Alfred studied her. You do not trust us. I trust the evidence more if no one can later argue that I carried it home and interfered with it. Mr. Bellamy nodded with visible approval. That is sensible. Alfred exhaled. Very well. Tabitha looked again at the 6 painted figures. She no longer needed the little image to tell her she had existed. Its value was simpler now. It showed what had been done. When the matter is spoken of publicly, she said, I want the finished portrait and this study seen together. Alfred's attention sharpened. Publicly. The accusation became public when Nerissa suggested I had forgotten. Aubrey made my memory into entertainment in other people's drawing rooms. I will not accept a private correction that leaves the public lie untouched. Alfred was silent. Then he nodded. You are right. It was not enough to repair everything between them. It was enough for that morning. As Mr. Bellamy returned the letter to the portfolio and the mahogany study to the locked cabinet, Tabitha watched each object go back to its proper place. Nothing magical had occurred. The truth had not appeared from nowhere. It had simply survived where someone had thought it too unimportant to destroy. On the pavement outside the studio, Alfred handed Tabitha into the carriage and paused before following. Will you tell Westmarsh what we saw? She thought of Montague, asking what she intended rather than deciding what should be done. She thought of the hand he had offered at Westmarsh House, and of the uncertainty she had spoken aloud only yesterday. Did he believe her because he knew her, or because her wound resembled his own? She still did not have the complete answer. Yet another truth had become equally clear. When the finished portrait and the small mahogany study finally stood side by side, she wanted Montague in the room, not ahead of her, not speaking for her, beside her. Yes, Tabitha said as Alfred took the opposite seat. I will tell him, because when I speak the truth before everyone, I want him there to hear me say it. Sure. By the afternoon of the 7th of June, Nerissa Thurlow had abandoned the hope of proving Lady Tabitha mistaken, and begun trying to convince her husband that truth itself could be indecent if spoken before enough people. Alfred stood near the library window at Stedham House, with both hands behind his back, while Nerissa paced once between the writing desk and the hearth. Tabitha had entered only moments earlier and stopped when she heard her sister-in-law say, "There is no reason to turn this into a public spectacle." Alfred's expression had changed since the visit to Mr. Bellamy's studio. He no longer looked confused when the portrait was mentioned. He looked tired. "It became public before I knew the facts," he said. "That does not mean we must make it worse." Nerissa's gaze shifted toward Tabitha. "You see, this is exactly what I feared. A family matter is becoming entertainment." Tabitha removed her gloves slowly. "Aubrey made my memory entertainment in Lady Wellingham's drawing room. Aubrey was defending himself. From what? From being made to look foolish." Tabitha almost laughed. "He proposed to a woman who refused him. That is disappointing. It is not persecution." Nerissa's face hardened. "You could have spared him." "By pretending I had accepted?" Alfred spoke before Nerissa could answer. "Enough." His voice was quieter than Tabitha expected. "The portraitist has the original composition study. He has your written instruction, Nerissa. He has his daybook." Tabitha attended both sittings. She did not ask to be removed. Nerissa folded her hands before her. "I acted on what I believed would happen." "You acted as if believing something gave you authority to make it appear settled." Alfred's words startled all three of them. Nerissa stared at her husband. Tabitha did not interrupt. "We can address it privately," Nerissa said after a pause. "Mr. Bellamy can send a letter. We can tell people there was a misunderstanding. There is no need to display household correspondence before society." Tabitha met her eyes. "A private correction would leave the public accusation untouched. People will forget. That has been the family solution to me for years." Silence followed. Nerissa looked away first. Before Alfred could answer, the butler entered to announce several afternoon callers. The conversation had to end, because Stedham House remained, despite everything, a house in Mayfair during the season. Within minutes, the drawing room filled with the ritual of cards, greetings, tea, and apparently harmless observations. Montague Staunton arrived among the later callers. He bowed first to Nerissa, then Alfred, and finally Tabitha. "Lady Tabitha." "Your Grace." His eyes held hers for a moment. She had already told him, during a proper call the previous day, what she and Alfred had seen at Mr. Bellamy's studio. He knew the study showed 6 figures. He knew Nerissa's original instruction remained in the portraitist's commission file. He knew the sitting daybook confirmed both sittings. Nothing more had been added since. Montague did not ask whether she wished him to intervene. He had learned that her silence was not an invitation for management. Sir Aubrey Crewe entered 10 minutes later. Tabitha felt the room sharpen almost imperceptibly. He greeted Nerissa with familiar warmth, Alfred with restraint, and Montague with a bow that was technically correct and emotionally cold. To Tabitha, he gave the expression of a man determined to appear generous. "Lady Tabitha." "Sir Aubrey, I hope you are well." "Very. I am glad." He turned slightly so the people nearest them could hear without being openly invited to listen. "I would not wish anyone to think our recent misunderstanding has caused me lasting resentment." Tabitha knew at once what he was doing. The attack was different now. He could no longer safely argue that she had imagined the portrait sittings. Alfred had seen the evidence, so Aubrey would rewrite the proposal. Instead, "How magnanimous," Tabitha said. A woman nearby lowered her teacup. Aubrey smiled. "There is no need for sarcasm. I understand that attention from unexpected quarters may have altered your view of what once seemed a sensible arrangement." His glance toward Montague was brief enough to preserve deniability. "I have therefore decided not to pursue the matter." Tabitha looked at him. "What matter?" "Our understanding." "There was no understanding. Call it what you wish. I merely want it known that I bear you no ill will and have withdrawn my intentions." The room grew quieter. Aubrey had chosen his language carefully. If accepted, it would turn Tabitha into a woman abandoned by one suitor after becoming dazzled by a duke. He would regain the dignity of choice by stealing hers. Something in Tabitha settled. 2 weeks earlier, she might have attempted a detailed defense. She might have explained the date of the proposal, repeated every sentence, reminded everyone that Nerissa's assumptions were not consent. She no longer needed to. "You cannot reject what I refused." Aubrey's smile vanished. The silence in the drawing room was complete enough that the small click of a porcelain cup against its saucer sounded unnaturally loud. Tabitha did not look toward Montague. She did not need his reaction to know the sentence belonged to her. Aubrey's face colored. "You make it sound very dramatic." "No, I make it accurate. I offered you a respectable marriage. And I said no, because you had begun imagining something better." His gaze flicked toward the Duke again. Montague remained motionless. "You had every reason to accept me," Aubrey continued. "At your age, in your position, without an establishment of your own, any sensible woman would have understood the advantage." There, the room heard what his politeness had hidden. Not love, not even companionship. Entitlement. He had expected acceptance because he believed Tabitha had insufficient value to refuse him. Tabitha felt no triumph, only clarity. "Then your error," she said, "was not proposing. It was believing gratitude would answer for me." Lady Harbury, seated near the window, slowly set down her cup. Alfred's face had gone cold. Nerissa whispered, "Aubrey, too late." Aubrey seemed to realize it. He bowed stiffly. "I see there is nothing to be gained by continuing." "At last," Tabitha said. "We agree." He left within minutes. The other callers did not immediately follow, but conversation became strained, then hurried. Society understood when it had witnessed something worth repeating. Half an hour later, the drawing room had emptied except for Alfred, Nerissa, Tabitha, Montague, and Tabitha's maternal aunt, who remained near the window with the discretion of a woman who understood that propriety did not require deafness. Nerissa excused herself with a headache. Alfred went after her, leaving the doors open and servants moving in the corridor. Montague did not approach Tabitha until she looked at him first. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes. Do you want me to do anything?" Tabitha felt the significance of the wording. Not what should be done, not what he intended to do. What did she want? She glanced toward the family portrait visible through the adjoining room. "Mr. Bellamy is willing to bring the study and his original records when the matter is addressed." "I know. Alfred says it should happen soon. And what do you want from me?" Tabitha looked at Montague. He had rank enough to dominate any room in London. He could threaten Aubrey socially, instruct Alfred, demand that Nerissa apologize, or turn the coming reckoning into an exhibition of ducal protection. She wanted none of those things. She wanted something more difficult because it required restraint. "Stand beside me when they see the truth," she said, nothing more. Montague's expression changed with a tenderness that was almost harder to bear than admiration. "I can do that." Tabitha moved before she had time to question herself. She reached toward him and took his hand. It was not the formal contact of a dance. It was not his offer, as at Westmarsh House. This time the choice began with her. His fingers closed around hers, only after she had settled her hand into his. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The gesture lasted only a few breaths, but it carried a certainty Tabitha had not felt when Aubrey had spoken of expectations, understandings, and arrangements. Montague did not pull her nearer. He did not turn the moment into a promise she had not offered. He simply held the hand she had freely given him. When Tabitha released him, his fingers opened at once. "Tomorrow afternoon," he said quietly. "May I ask you a question?" She felt an answering warmth move through her. "You may ask, and if you prefer not to answer, then I won't." The faintest smile touched his mouth. "Good." For the first time, Tabitha wondered whether what had begun as recognition might be becoming something neither of them could explain merely by pointing toward a portrait. "Sir, on the afternoon of the 8th of June, Lady Tabitha Thurlow entered Westmarsh House, knowing that the Duke intended to ask her a question, and fearing that she already knew what the question was. Her widowed maternal aunt accompanied her, as propriety required, and settled in the adjoining drawing-room with a book and a cup of tea. While the connecting doors remained fully open, servants crossed the corridor beyond at intervals. Nothing about the arrangement could reasonably invite gossip, yet Tabitha felt more exposed than she had beneath the Stedham portrait. Montague stood near the long windows when she entered. He had dismissed neither the servants nor her aunt, and he did not approach until Tabitha had greeted the older woman and chosen her own chair. "Lady Tabitha." "Your Grace." For a moment neither spoke. Yesterday she had taken his hand first. Today even that small memory carried weight. Montague sat opposite rather than beside her. "You asked whether I believed you because I knew you, or because what happened to you resembled what happened to me." Tabitha nodded. "I answered as well as I could then." "You did. I've thought about it since." His gaze remained steady on hers. "So have I." That was the truth she had come prepared to offer, though not the whole of it. Tabitha folded her hands in her lap. "There's something I need to say before you ask whatever you meant to ask yesterday." Montague's expression sharpened, but he did not interrupt. "I'm afraid we may have mistaken recognition for something larger." The words sounded colder aloud than they had in her mind. She continued before fear could make her soften them. "You saw me when everyone else found it convenient not to. You believed me when my own family preferred assumptions. That matters to me more than I can explain." Montague's face remained composed, but a muscle shifted once near his jaw. "And you think gratitude has confused you?" "Perhaps. Only you." Tabitha drew a breath. "No. I think you may have been drawn to me because my injury reflected yours. I was forgotten. You were remembered wrongly. We understood one another very quickly because of that." "We did. Too quickly, perhaps." He looked away toward the windows for the first time. Tabitha watched him, and the ache that followed his silence frightened her precisely because it was not gratitude. "And perhaps," she said more quietly, "I wanted your belief so badly that I began wanting you with it." Montague looked back at her. No offense, no anger, something more vulnerable. "Do you believe that now?" "I don't know." His eyes closed briefly, then opened. "Good." Tabitha blinked. "Good. If you'd decided before coming here that your uncertainty was proof against us, I would have had very little chance of answering honestly." Despite herself, she almost smiled. "You make uncertainty sound generous. At present, it's the kindest thing in the room." He rose, but did not come nearer. Instead, he went to the mantel and rested one hand against it, giving himself distance. "You're right about one thing. At first, I noticed the similarity between us. Tabitha remained still. I saw a woman publicly diminished by a version of events she hadn't chosen, and I recognized something I understood. That made me look more closely." His voice deepened. "It didn't make me love you." Tabitha's breath stopped. Montague did not move toward her. "I love the way you notice absurdity and refuse to become cruel because of it. I love that when Sir Aubrey tried to make your memory into a performance, you admitted you'd been wrong about one useless date rather than build your dignity upon pretending perfection. I love that you asked your brother to see the evidence instead of humiliating him for failing you. I love that you can make a room uncomfortable simply by asking the question everyone else hoped you'd be too polite to ask." Tabitha felt heat rise behind her eyes. Montague continued, and now the restraint in him seemed harder to maintain. "I love the way you listen. I love that you laugh when you mean it and not when a room demands it. I love that you handed me something that belonged to your mother because I asked before touching it. And I love that yesterday, when you needed me, you didn't ask me to rescue you. You asked me to stand beside you." Tabitha looked down because looking at him had become almost unbearable. "Those things existed before I noticed them," he said. "They'd exist if I'd never entered Stedham House." She lifted her eyes again. "Montague." It was the first time she had used his Christian name. The effect on him was immediate. Some carefully maintained distance vanished from his face. "There's something you're right about, too," he said. "I've spent years believing that silence was virtue because silence once protected someone who trusted me. But afterward, I kept using it, not to protect anyone, to protect myself." Tabitha said nothing. "I let London misunderstand me because correcting it seemed undignified. Then I let that habit become a wall. I told myself I was private. In truth, I became unavailable." His gaze did not leave hers. "You were right when you called it habit. I don't want to hide behind it with you." The room seemed suddenly very quiet. From the adjoining drawing room came the soft turn of a page as Tabitha's aunt continued reading. Tabitha rose. Montague's attention followed her, but he remained where he was. "What do you want?" she asked. His answer came without hesitation. "To know you accurately, to let you know me accurately, even when the truth is less flattering than the story." Something inside Tabitha eased, not because uncertainty had disappeared, because he had not tried to defeat it with a title, a promise, or an argument. She crossed the space between them. Montague's hands remained at his sides. Tabitha stopped close enough to see the tension in his breathing. "And if I'm wrong sometimes," she asked, "then you'll be wrong sometimes. If I disappoint you, then I imagine we'll have a conversation neither of us enjoys." A laugh escaped her through the emotion tightening her throat. "That's not very romantic." "I'm doing my best. Your best is improving." His answering smile was brief and unguarded. Tabitha did not think after that. She stepped forward and put her arms around him. Montague went utterly still. Only when she settled fully against him did his arms close around her. The embrace was careful for perhaps half a second, then honest. Tabitha felt his breath leave him near her temple. She held him back, not because he had saved her, not because he was a duke, because he was the man who had learned to wait for her answer. When they drew apart, Montague did not keep her there. His hands fell away. His eyes searched hers. "May I kiss you?" Tabitha's heart struck once, hard enough to make the rest of the room disappear. Yes, she closed the remaining distance herself. His kiss was gentle at first, almost disbelieving, and Tabitha answered it without hesitation. One hand rested lightly against his sleeve. His fingers touched her cheek, only after she leaned into the contact. There was no urgency in it, only warmth, wonder, and the unmistakable knowledge that both had chosen the moment. When they separated, Montague kept enough distance for her to breathe. "I love you, Tabitha." There was no wit in his voice now, no shield. She touched his hand. "I love you too." The words felt neither reckless nor sudden. They felt like something that had been growing quietly each time he asked instead of assumed. Montague's fingers closed around hers. "Then I have one more question, and I want you to hear it without tomorrow's confrontation attached to it." Tabitha's pulse quickened. "Ask." "When this matter is finished, when there's no debt of rescue between us and no room left for anyone to claim you accepted from gratitude, will you marry me?" He did not kneel. He did not trap her with spectacle. He simply stood before her and waited. Tabitha thought of Aubrey speaking of expectations, Nerissa arranging June, before Tabitha knew there was anything to arrange. The portrait that had removed her because others had decided where she belonged. Then she looked at Montague. "Yes," she said. His eyes changed. "Yes? Yes, Montague. I'll marry you." He lifted her hand but paused before bringing it toward his lips. The question was in his eyes again. Tabitha turned her hand willingly within his. Only then did he press a brief kiss to her knuckles. "Tomorrow," she said, "I speak first. Tomorrow you speak whenever you choose, and our engagement remains private until afterward. Until you say otherwise," she smiled. "Good." Montague smiled back. Beyond the open doors, her aunt deliberately turned another page. Tomorrow, the finished Stedham portrait and the small mahogany study would stand in the same room. Nerissa would face the instruction she had written. Aubrey would face the answer he had refused to hear. But for one quiet afternoon before the reckoning, Tabitha allowed herself something no portrait could confer and no family could arrange. She had chosen, and she had been chosen in return. On the evening of the 9th of June, Lady Tabitha Thurlow stood beneath the Stedham family portrait, knowing that, before the candles burned low, everyone in the room would have to decide whether they preferred truth to the version that had been more convenient. Alfred had invited only those whose presence mattered. Lady Harbury was there, as were several guests who had heard Nerissa question Tabitha's memory at supper. Others had witnessed Sir Aubrey Crewe turn one mistaken date into drawing-room entertainment. The gathering was too small to be mistaken for a ball, and too deliberate to be called an ordinary reception. Above them hung the finished portrait, 5 figures arranged with such practiced elegance that no stranger could have guessed a 6th had ever existed. Nerissa stood near the hearth in dark green silk. Aubrey remained close to the windows. Montague Staunton, Duke of Westmarsh, had arrived last. He had greeted Tabitha with the same formal restraint he would have shown before any company, though only yesterday she had embraced him, kissed him by mutual consent, told him she loved him, and accepted his proposal. Their engagement remained private, because Tabitha had asked that it remain so until she had spoken for herself. Montague gave her no secret signal beyond meeting her eyes once. He did not move closer. He did not take command of the room. He stood where she could see him and waited. Alfred stepped forward. "There has been enough speculation concerning the Stedham portrait," he said. "My sister has asked to address the matter herself." He moved aside. The room became silent. Tabitha felt the old instinct rise for one brief moment, smile, soften. Make everyone comfortable. She let the instinct pass. When this portrait was unveiled, she began, Sir Aubrey suggested that perhaps even the painter couldn't remember me long enough to put me in oils. Aubrey's jaw tightened. Later, Lady Stedham said that I had forgotten conversations in which I supposedly expected to leave this household. When I remembered the date of an unrelated supper incorrectly, that mistake was used to suggest that perhaps I had also forgotten whether I attended the portrait sittings, whether I asked to be removed, and whether I accepted Sir Aubrey. She paused. I was wrong about that supper. I may be wrong about many small things in my life. I no longer believe a woman must prove herself incapable of error before her word deserves respect. Lady Harbury lowered her fan. Nerissa's expression hardened. Tabitha, no one has said. Alfred interrupted quietly. Let her finish. Nerissa looked at her husband with open disbelief. Tabitha turned toward the drawing-room doors. Mr. Bellamy. The butler admitted the portraitist and his assistant. The assistant carried a protective wooden case. Mr. Bellamy carried his sitting daybook and the original Stedham commission file. Nerissa went unnaturally still. Aubrey glanced toward his sister before he could stop himself. Mr. Bellamy bowed. His assistant placed the case upon a prepared table. Mr. Bellamy opened it himself and lifted out the small painted composition study on mahogany that had remained in his studio since before Tabitha's first visit. He did not offer it to Tabitha. He carried it to an easel positioned several feet from the finished portrait and secured it there. A murmur moved through the gathering. The difference required no explanation. The large finished portrait held 5 figures. The preliminary study held 6. At the far left stood Lady Tabitha Thurlow, one hand resting upon the green velvet stool she had described long before Alfred saw the panel. Lady Harbury rose slightly from her chair. That is unmistakably Lady Tabitha. Yes, Mr. Bellamy said. Lady Tabitha attended 2 sittings. He opened his daybook without surrendering it, the 17th of March and the 9th of April. He indicated the entries to Alfred and the guests nearest him. The composition study reflects the arrangement approved after the 2nd sitting. Tabitha looked toward Nerissa. So I did not imagine being there. Nerissa lifted her chin. No one now disputes that. Then we may address why I disappeared. Mr. Bellamy opened the commission file and removed the original instruction Nerissa had sent 3 days after the 2nd sitting. It remained in his hands. I received this from Lady Stedham. Nerissa's face showed no surprise. I managed the commission. I have never denied that. The instruction ordered Mr. Bellamy to remove me, Tabitha said. It stated that I would not remain in the Stedham household after June because of an expected understanding with Sir Aubrey. Aubrey spoke sharply. The expectation was entirely reasonable. Tabitha did not turn toward him yet. Her eyes remained on Nerissa. Did I ever ask you to remove me from the portrait? Nerissa's mouth tightened. You knew circumstances were likely to change. That wasn't my question. There is no need to reduce every family conversation to an interrogation. Did I ever ask you to remove me? Nerissa looked around the room. Every face was waiting. No, Tabitha allowed the answer to remain where everyone could hear it. Did I ever tell you that I intended to leave Stedham House after June? Nerissa hesitated longer this time. No, thank you. Only then did Tabitha face Aubrey. Sir Aubrey, did I ever accept your proposal? He gave a short, incredulous laugh. There was an understanding between the families. Did I accept you? You knew I intended to speak. Did I accept you? Not formally. Did I ever say anything that meant yes? Aubrey looked toward Nerissa, then Alfred. No one helped him. No. Tabitha felt the room settle around the answer. She did not feel victorious. She felt clear. Then the family understood itself and called that my consent. Aubrey's composure cracked. You speak as though anyone acted with malice. You were 35, unmarried, and living in your brother's household. A respectable marriage was the obvious course. No sensible person expected you to refuse an arrangement so advantageous. Tabitha looked at him steadily. That was your mistake. You confused what seemed advantageous to you with what I had chosen for myself. I offered you security, and I refused it. After the Duke began paying you attention, a few heads turned toward Montague. He did not move. Tabitha answered before anyone else could. My refusal was mine when I gave it, just as my acceptance would have been mine if I had chosen differently. Your disappointment does not convert my no into a misunderstanding. Aubrey had no answer that did not make him smaller. Alfred stepped forward. My sister is correct. Nerissa turned toward him. Alfred. He looked at Tabitha first. I did not instruct Mr. Bellamy to remove you. I did not promise you to Aubrey, but I accepted the convenience of believing that Nerissa had discussed your future with you. When the portrait appeared without you, I did not ask the question I should have asked. When you said you had not consented, I hesitated because accepting the truth required admitting I had failed to notice what was happening in my own household. His voice roughened slightly. I failed you, Tabitha. The apology struck deeper than anything Nerissa or Aubrey had said because Tabitha still loved her brother. She did not rush to release him from it. Yes, she said quietly. Alfred nodded, as though he understood that forgiveness was not owed on command. Then he faced the gathering. The finished portrait will no longer be displayed as the official Stedham family likeness. After tonight, it will be removed from its place of honor and placed in storage while its future is properly considered. It will not be repainted tonight or altered to pretend the omission never occurred. Nerissa went pale. You would disgrace your own wife for this? Alfred looked at her. No, I will stop asking my sister to bear the disgrace privately, because acknowledging what happened embarrasses us publicly. He continued, for the remainder of this season, there will be no further large entertaining at Stedham House under your direction. We will withdraw from those engagements that may properly be declined. Nerissa's anger surfaced fully now. You are allowing her to divide this family. No, Alfred said. I am admitting that we divided it when we treated her silence as permission. Aubrey reached for his gloves. Alfred stopped him before he could leave. There will be no further suggestion, with my support or in my house, that Lady Tabitha accepted you or that you withdrew an offer she wanted. You proposed. She refused. That is the fact. Aubrey gave a rigid bow. I hardly require Stedham approval to conduct my affairs. Then losing it should inconvenience you very little. Aubrey left without saying farewell. The silence after him felt cleaner than the silence before. Mr. Bellamy returned Nerissa's instruction to the commission file. His assistant removed the mahogany study from the easel, replaced it inside the protective case, and fastened the lid. The daybook remained with Mr. Bellamy. The records had entered Stedham House in the portraitist's custody, and would leave in the same custody. Nothing had been destroyed. Nothing had been transferred to Tabitha. The finished portrait still hung intact above the mantel, but whatever authority it once possessed had disappeared. Tabitha looked at it and discovered she no longer wished to be painted back into the empty place. Restoring her to the old image would not undo the decision that had removed her. Montague crossed the room only after the evidence had been put away, and Tabitha had stepped from beneath the portrait. He stopped several feet from her. "Lady Tabitha." His voice carried without becoming theatrical. "There is something I would like to say, but only if you wish it known tonight." Warmth moved through her at the question. Even now, with society waiting and his rank capable of commanding every eye in the room, he gave the decision back to her. "Yes," she said, "I wish it." Something unguarded entered his face. "Then I may tell you that Lady Tabitha has agreed to become my wife." The room seemed to inhale together. Alfred stared at his sister before surprise gave way to a slow smile. Nerissa closed her eyes for one brief moment. Montague continued. "I chose Lady Tabitha before I knew whether society would ever remember her correctly. I did not choose her because she was humiliated. I did not choose her because she required protection. Once I began to know her, overlooking her became impossible." Then he stopped. He did not explain Tabitha to the room. He left her the final word. Tabitha looked at the people who had once laughed while she stood missing beneath her own family portrait. Then she looked at the man who had never treated belief as ownership. "And I chose him after I knew he would let me speak for myself." She extended her hand. Montague took it only then. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. There was no kiss before the watching room. Their love had already been spoken where it belonged. This moment was not about spectacle. It was about mutual choice made visible. Mr. Bellamy, preparing to leave, paused beside the protective case. His expression softened as he looked from Tabitha to Montague. "Your Grace, Lady Tabitha, when the time is right, perhaps you might consider sitting for a portrait of your own." Tabitha looked once more at the finished Stedham likeness above the mantel. Then she tightened her fingers around Montague's hand. "Perhaps," she said, "but next time I shall choose where I sit. Sur, on the morning of the 27th August 1852. Lady Tabitha Thurlow became the Duchess of Westmarsh, without once feeling that she had been moved from one man's household into another's possession. The ceremony took place in a small London church before a restrained gathering of family and close connections. Alfred stood near the front, quieter than he had once been, and when Tabitha met his eyes before walking toward Montague, he did not give her the old encouraging smile that had so often meant, "Make this easy for everyone." He simply nodded, as though acknowledging that the decision belonged entirely to her. In the 11 weeks since the truth about the Stedham portrait had been made public, Alfred had learned to repair their relationship through smaller acts rather than grand apologies. He asked before arranging visits. He listened when she answered. He had ensured that the marriage settlement protected the modest maternal property already belonging to Tabitha, rather than allowing anyone to describe Montague's wealth as a rescue from financial uncertainty. Nerissa remained Countess of Stedham. Nothing theatrical had happened to her title, her marriage, or her place in the family. Yet the season had ended differently from the one she had imagined. She no longer directed Stedham entertaining as though the household were an extension of her will, and when arrangements concerned Tabitha, Alfred no longer accepted assumptions as evidence of consent. Sir Aubrey Crewe remained Sir Aubrey Crewe, a baronet with the same name and rank he had possessed before the scandal. What he had lost was the easier privilege of telling society which version of Tabitha's refusal should be remembered. People now knew that he had proposed. They knew she had refused. Nothing more flattering could be built around it. Tabitha thought of none of that when Montague turned toward her before the clergyman. He looked more solemn than she had ever seen him, but not guarded. The man who had once allowed London to misremember him rather than expose another person's confidence now stood before her, without hiding behind wit, silence, or rank. When the vows were spoken, his voice was steady. So was hers. Afterward, when they emerged from the church into the late summer light, several guests offered congratulations, and Lady Harbury cried without apology. Alfred kissed Tabitha's cheek and said quietly, "I hope I have learned enough not to tell you what sort of duchess you ought to be." Tabitha looked at him. "That is an excellent beginning." He laughed, and the sound carried relief rather than embarrassment. Montague joined them a moment later. "Should I be concerned?" he asked. "My brother has promised not to instruct me in duchessing." "Then I owe him a debt." "You don't. We have discussed debts." His eyes warmed immediately. "We have." The exchange was light, but Tabitha heard beneath it the promise he had made before asking her to marry him. No debt of rescue, no gratitude mistaken for love, no future arranged by people who believed they knew what was best for her. She had chosen him. He had chosen her. The distinction remained precious precisely because neither choice erased the other. The following afternoon, the 28th August, they arrived at Mr. Bellamy's studio for the sitting he had proposed. On the night, the Stedham portrait lost its place of honor. The small mahogany composition study remained among his studio records. Nerissa's instruction remained in the old Stedham commission file. Neither had passed into Tabitha's possession after the confrontation. They belonged to the history of what had happened, not to the new portrait waiting beneath a clean canvas. Mr. Bellamy greeted them with more nervous ceremony than he had ever shown Tabitha before. "Your Grace, Your Grace." Tabitha glanced at Montague. "That may take some getting used to." "I've had years of practice with one of us," he murmured. "I'm afraid you're on your own." Mr. Bellamy wisely pretended not to hear. Near the north-facing window, 2 chairs had been placed against a simple background. One stood slightly forward. The other had been positioned farther back, and to the left in the traditional assumption that the Duke would occupy the stronger visual place. Mr. Bellamy looked at Tabitha. "Where would your Grace prefer to stand?" The question stopped her, not because it was difficult, but because she remembered another studio and another composition. She remembered the green velvet stool beneath her hand. She remembered sitting twice for a portrait from which she later vanished. She remembered a family deciding that because she was expected to marry, there was no reason to preserve her place among them. Montague said nothing. Mr. Bellamy waited. Tabitha walked toward the chairs. "I don't think I wish to stand behind my husband." Mr. Bellamy immediately reached toward the rear chair. "Of course, Your Grace. I can move." No, Tabitha looked at the arrangement. "Put them beside one another." Mr. Bellamy paused, then smiled. "Beside one another." His assistant moved the second chair forward until neither occupied the foreground. Montague watched the change with undisguised satisfaction. "Any objections?" Tabitha asked him. She raised an eyebrow. "I was hoping for a taller chair." "You already have an unfair advantage." "Rank? Height? Cruel. You'll survive." Mr. Bellamy concealed a smile behind a cough. Tabitha sat first. Montague took the chair beside hers only after she had chosen her place. A small table stood near Tabitha's right hand. She opened her reticule and removed the brown morocco case she had carried through every stage of the story the old portrait had begun. The case remained intact, Between two thin slips of glass lay the pressed rosemary that had belonged to her mother, faded now, but still preserving the delicate shape of its leaves. Mr. Bellamy noticed it. "Would your grace like that included?" Tabitha opened the case fully. "Yes." Montague turned toward her. She looked down at the rosemary for a moment. "Not because I am frightened of being forgotten." "No," he asked softly. "No, my mother deserves to be remembered." Something tender entered his face. "Then she should be." Mr. Bellamy positioned the open case on the small table, where the studio light could catch the glass without obscuring the rosemary. Beneath it, he stepped backward and studied the composition. "If your graces are comfortable, we might begin with the hands." Tabitha glanced toward Montague. One of his hands rested naturally on the arm of his chair. Weeks earlier, at Westmarsh House, he had offered that hand to her and waited. Later, she had been the one to reach first. She had learned that affection could be powerful without ever becoming a claim. Now she removed her glove. Montague watched but did not move. Tabitha placed her bare hand over his. His fingers shifted beneath hers, then turned gently until their hands rested together by mutual choice. "Is this comfortable?" he asked. "Very." "You are certain? Don't ruin the moment by becoming tedious." His mouth curved. "I love you too." Tabitha laughed softly. Mr. Bellamy looked away with the exaggerated discretion of a portraitist who had certainly heard worse things in aristocratic studios. Tabitha turned toward Montague. "That was not what I said." "No, but I was listening for the important part." She lifted her free hand and touched his face. The gesture was hers from beginning to end. Montague leaned into her palm, but did not pull her closer. Tabitha did. She kissed him briefly, warmly, with none of the uncertainty that had marked their first kiss. When she drew back, his eyes held hers. "I love you, Montague." The humor in his face softened into something deeper. "I love you, Tabitha." There was no audience whose approval mattered. No villain left to answer. No family judgment waiting to reverse the moment. The conflict was over, and love remained after it. Tabitha lowered her hand from his cheek, but kept the other resting over his. Mr. Bellamy returned to the easel. "Ready, your graces?" Tabitha looked once at the clean canvas. She was not being restored to the old portrait. She did not want to be. That image belonged to people who had thought a woman's place could be decided before she spoke. This one would begin differently. "Ready," she said. Montague's fingers closed gently around hers. The brush touched the canvas for the first time. Beside them, the open Morocco case caught the afternoon light, and the rosemary beneath its glass remained exactly where Tabitha had chosen to place it.